parliamentarians. Welcome. I'm going to have to say got it. Thank you. Welcome to our ongoing series of parliamentary lessons that will make all your meetings better. And as you know, we are recording tonight's presentation. Our lesson tonight, our parliamentary session tonight is got an idea? Make a motion and get it done. And it is presented by Carol Prahinsky, a recently certified registered parliamentarian. As an 11-month member of the National Association of Parliamentarians and the Mid-Michigan Unit, formerly known as the Genesee Area Unit, our speaker is excited to share thoughts on converting ideas into action through the motion process. Since 2007, Dr. Carol Prahinsky has been teaching supply chain management at Michigan State University. She recently won the Faculty Appreciation Award and is one of the top 50 business professors in the United States. Additionally, and importantly, Carol is a past international director of Toastmasters International and a past president of National Speakers Association, the Michigan chapter. Professional registered parliamentarian Elizabeth Haynes, who you have heard, is a member of the Louise Sachs unit. Elizabeth is our Zoom keeper for MSAP, and she is serving as moderator tonight. Elizabeth, do you have a few more comments to make?
As moderator, if you have questions as the presentation is being made, you can type them into the chat. At an appropriate time to interrupt our speaker, I will present the questions to the speaker. As I said earlier, it's helpful to leave your camera off unless you're going to be actively speaking, and to leave your computer muted so that we don't have unnecessary sound during the presentation. And if you have any other technical questions, you're having problems hearing, or any other kinds of questions, you can type them into the chat to me as well.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Our session is intended to be interactive. Carol will take questions and listen to ideas throughout the hour. Her enthusiasm and thought-provoking questions will help keep you engaged with lessons that can be applied immediately at your next meeting. Please join me in welcoming Carol Prahinsky.
Thank you. Thank you, Gretchen. Thank you, Elizabeth. And thank you to this organization for hosting these special events to get us to review Robert's Rules of Order and to feel more comfortable with it. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here, and I'm honored with the turnout that we have today. To get us started, I actually want to hear from you on what you think is one of the biggest challenges that new people have to parliamentary procedure. And if you would, put it into your chat function. You can find the chat feature down at the bottom. Click it, it says chat, and it opens up a dialog box. And if you would, just type in those ideas or barriers that people tend to have when using Robert's Rules of Order or other types of parliamentary procedures. What a great list already. I'm so glad you're here, Carolyn James, making a motion. That's what we're going to cover tonight. Wonderful. We have a great list, and I will tell you that this list is different from a list that I asked for from my Toastmaster Club. I happen to be an active member of Toastmasters, and they gave me a list as well, but we have different stuff on the list, which is, I expected it. All right, one of the things that they said to me was they really struggled with the jargon, the word choices, and how to phrase things properly without either sounding like a dummy or making it more complicated than it really should be. So I'd like to just read through some of the things that you've listed here so far. It's too rigid, needs a little bit more flexibility perhaps. Using the correct language. Dorothea says, chairs who do not take and keep control of a meeting. Oh, isn't that true? All right, making proper motions, know how to take the minutes. Okay, when do I speak? Maybe overwhelmed with the size of the Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised edition, which is a very heavy tome. Not clearly stating what they want. Not knowing the proper way to say it. Okay, again, aligning with the Toastmasters Club that I pulled. Not having enough experience. How to educate, engage, and elevate meetings with parliamentary procedure in a fun, oh goody, fun, accessible way when it has a bad reputation with so many misconceptions and so many misuses. Absolutely. Motions in minutes. Okay, talking without being recognized and or debating with a member rather than directing comments to the presiding officer. Very good. Getting my ideas into words. How do we phrase things properly? I want to thank you for your contribution to these ideas and getting them out in conversation with us tonight. My conversation with you is about, it's going to include, the first half of this session is going to include these barriers. And your list, I think it covers and touches all of the key points that I'm going to be raising tonight with the barriers. Get that cursor moving. There you go. So what are the barriers? You gave me a beautiful list. I'm going to go through and categorize some of these, and hopefully they align with what we covered today. And I might go back later and update my list based on what you shared with me today. All right, so it is inappropriate to use Robert's Rules of Order or any parliamentary procedure for idea generation and creativity. If we have ideas, let's use a different format, whether it be in a committee as a whole or a committee, let's go off and have a subcommittee or a committee doing some idea generation, brainstorming sessions, but not the assembly meeting with parliamentary procedure as its basis. All right, but let's find another way to do that. Now, there has been some dialogue about the importance of consensus in decision making, and that is different from parliamentary procedure. Consensus means that we all come to an agreement, or parliamentary procedure will typically say 50% or a majority will be in alignment with the decision that we are making today. Consensus also takes more time than parliamentary procedure. So when we're doing brainstorming, the times that I've seen brainstorming appropriate in the Robert's Rules of Order would be things like filling in the blank. That allows for a little bit of brainstorming, but certainly not to the level that sometimes organizations and groups need. That should be taken outside of the business meeting. Okay, what about the skills of the chair? That was mentioned a few times. I'm so glad to see that, and it does lend itself to barriers and frustration. If we have the chair unable or unknowledgeable about the parliamentary procedure, or that they are a tyrant as well, that we have some tyrants out there that will want to monopolize and take control of the process of, I'm going to say making a decision, but it's really an authoritarian aspect of the decision-making process. So they can create tension, misunderstanding, and it's really helpful for the assembly to know the rules. If we know the rules, we can guide the chair either through out of order, I'm sorry, it's guide the chair through things like point of order and other aspects that we can take to help manage the control of that meeting. Or if we have to, we can ask the chair to step down. Another complex topic that I'm not going to get into tonight, but it is options available to us. When we look at the skills of the chair, we also want to make sure that we're following timing and voting procedures. What is the voting process? What do the bylaws say in terms of the type of voting? We'll get into voting tonight. And then lastly, sometimes chairs like to intimidate others with their jargon and word choices. that they say, I'm superior to you. And that's really, there is, sometimes we feel that there is an importance factor to the using the right terminology, but it's certainly in our minds not necessarily to push out others to say, I know more than you, therefore you shouldn't be participating in the conversation. So this lack of knowledge I've touched on already. The jargon and terms can cause confusion, but also people feel intimidated and a lack of confidence when they don't know exactly what to do. And so our job, either as a chairperson or another member of the assembly, is to help them feel more comfortable and confident with saying, even though you don't have the right wording of, let's say, a motion, that we will still support you in the process of getting that motion heard, getting it into the right format, and then voted on as appropriate. Sometimes people will mention the sequence of rules, which motions have priority, how do I select somebody from the assembly, who's the next person that I have speak, and so forth. And so that can also create some difficulties in the process. Then what about these terms like previous question? This is a term appropriate for parliamentarians. It's in our book and we get to know it really well. But people that aren't familiar with Robert's Rules of Order will look at this phrase, previous question, and say, I have no idea what you're talking about. And so sometimes we just maybe need to translate it so that our audience feels more comfortable with what we're saying. We're going to go ahead and vote on that. Are you ready for the vote? Okay, so something simple like that can help people in the audience feel more comfortable. The words postpone indefinitely also causes problems. And typically many people have heard and have used the term lay on the table because they think that is going to kill the motion that has been presented, when in fact they want that term postpone indefinitely. But postpone means we're going to talk about it later. Indefinitely means I don't know when we're going to talk about it, but maybe tomorrow, I don't know. And so that just having those types of words can create some difficulty with people that aren't so knowledgeable about parliamentary procedure. And that's, again, something that we'd like to minimize. And so translating some of these terms can be helpful. Lastly, we have strange rules and different rules. So I keep mentioning Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, which I'm using as the basis of this presentation tonight. But we also have other parliamentary practices. We were talking about some before this webinar started tonight. Examples would be Renton's in Australia, and also there's a huge number, but our parliament, our Congress has different rules as well. And so all of these things can come into play with being confused and hearing something or reading about it and then walking into a meeting and saying, well, they're not doing it the way that I read about it. All right, and all these things can come into play. I want to give credence and thanks to the following people for helping me with this list. And if I present it in the future, I will list this organization as well. Michael Morrison, some of you may know him. He's out of Toronto as a registered parliamentarian. He has a blog that I used. A National Student Council in Reston, Virginia. And it's a website designed for students who are just learning parliamentary procedure. A very nice overview. And lastly, my Toastmaster Club, C Division Advanced Speakers, Toastmasters in East Lansing, Michigan. We meet hybrid. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start with, we're talking tonight about Section 4 of Robert's Rules of Order in 12th edition. And I want to start with an idea. So this is Mr. Hunch. Mr. Hunch has an idea, and he's looking at his cat in a very loving way. He loves his cat. And he says, I got this idea. And my idea is that we will take my cat perhaps to a meeting. Wouldn't that be lovely? And so he's saying, what if we instead have a cat cafe location instead of our regular routine location? And I see this place on a map and it's a cat cafe. Let's go ahead and have our meeting there. It will reduce stress. And he's got all these ideas in mind of what can happen with the new location. And so he says, all right, I think I'm going to propose this at the next meeting. So Mr. Hunch goes to the next meeting, and at the appropriate spot in the meeting, which typically is new business, Mr. Hunch is acknowledged by the chair, and he says, I'm kind of new at this. I've never made a motion before, and I'm not sure how to phrase it, but I have an idea and I want to get it implemented. And so this chair says, wonderful, that's what I can help with. All right, so the chair says, Mr. Hunch, what is your idea? Mr. Hunch comes back and says, well, I'd like to change our meeting venue to be located at a cat cafe in the future. And so the chair says, okay, to phrase that properly, you would say, I move. Let's go ahead and get that up there. I move to make a main, and whatever the main motion is. I move to change our location of our meeting to the cat cafe and downtown, blah, blah, blah. Okay, and so this is the first of 6 steps in the process of making that motion and getting it to implementation. All right, so the first step is Mr. Hunch makes his motion and he repeats after the chair guides him, I move to, and repeats the main motion. All right, so now the chair has got to be reflecting and thinking, okay, is this out of order or not? And so one of the first questions is, does this violate our charter, bylaws, or federal, state, or local laws? And so he reviews in his mind what the bylaws are for his organization, or the charter documents of his organization, to say, does it specify where we have to meet? And the answer in his mind is no, it doesn't. So, okay, so far so good. Does it conflict with a motion already adopted or at a committee under review already? And the answer was no. Is it a same motion that has already been considered at this meeting? And the answer is no. Is it outside the scope of our organization mission? Again, answer was no. So the chair comes back and says, Mr. Hunch, Mr. Hunch has made a motion. I'm sorry, he says this to the assembly. Mr. Hunch has made a motion to change our meeting location to the Pet Cafe in downtown, fill in the blank, downtown city. And he wants to know if there's interest, sorry, I'm saying this wrong, but he says, you know, is there a second to this motion? And so he's looking around saying, is there anybody going to make a second? There hasn't been anybody to say second. And then there, lo and behold, Miss Flower Power stands up and says, second. Now, what does that mean when somebody gives a second? Now, this is the second step in the process. The second says, I agree that this point should be considered by the assembly. But it doesn't necessarily suggest that the member is in favor of it. The member can actually vote against it, but they are saying, look, we as a group should consider this and get it onto our minutes that we did consider it. Okay, now let's go ahead back to the chair, and the chair will restate the motion. It must be stated exactly as was presented to him. And so he says it was moved and seconded that the meeting venue change to the Cat Cafe in downtown, in our downtown. And so the chair will then, once the chair has stated it, that's when it becomes a part of the assembly. Now it's up to the assembly to make decisions. But the chair will look back at Mr. Hunch and say, and wondering, Mr. Hunch, do you want to speak on this? And let's suppose Mr. Hunch does stand up and speak on it. He's able to say the reasons why he wants us to consider changing the meeting venue. Now, the other thing that could happen, and I'm going to go backwards a little bit, but it's possible that when the motion has been stated by the maker, Mr. Hunch, that the chair says, you know what, I think everybody in this audience is going to agree with this. Okay, everybody's going to agree with it. Therefore, we can use something called unanimous consent. And unanimous consent is when the chair will say, if there's no objection, we will change our meeting venue to the Cat Cafe in downtown. Another way to phrase it is there any objection to changing the meeting location to downtown? And then he pauses, and then he'll say, hearing no objection, the motion carries. However, if the chair believes that there might be some discussion related to this conversation, this motion, then he or she should not go into the unanimous consent option. This is typically used for things that where there probably won't be any debate, such as perhaps the minutes or the agenda that's being presented to the assembly. Okay, so once the chair has made the motion to the assembly, in other words, step 3, where it was stated to the assembly, this is where the audience, the assembly, can debate it and have a conversation about it. So the conversation is that, again, if Mr. Hunch wanted to speak, the chair will call on Mr. Hunch first. That's called assigning the floor. And that's for another conversation when we get into assigning the floor. That'll be a different chapter section of the book. But for now, let's just say Mr. Hunch doesn't want to talk. And so he's, or he does share his few cents, and then the chair can call on somebody else. As long as there's people interested in talking, the chair will call on them up to a point of maximum of 2 times. The person will get an opportunity to talk. And before a person has an opportunity to speak a second time, the chair is making sure that everybody who wants to speak has had at least 1 opportunity to speak. So now, at some point, it is possible that somebody will say, I move to amend. I move to amend. I would like us, instead of meeting at the Cat Cafe, I would like us to meet, especially in the summertime, at the dog park. All right, so there's an interest there in meeting at the dog park. And so the amendment will then go through the process and debate on that amendment. And eventually it'll be either passed or not. And let's suppose for this conversation, it does not carry. And so we're back to the Cat Cafe. And at some point, there's no more conversation from the audience. They're ready to make a decision. I'm going to go ahead and pause here. I see that, yes, Elizabeth, I see that we have some people chatting. Go ahead.
Yeah, the first question is, how long can each member speak?
10 minutes, unless there is a policy or in their bylaws that there's a change to that basic rule in Robert's Rules.
Can a member speak more than once?
Yes, they can speak twice, up to twice.
Okay. How would you adopt a rule to limit debate?
There is a motion, and Mr. Hunch could do this if he felt more comfortable and confident, but there is a motion that we can, to extend or limit the debate, and simply say, I move to extend, or I move to limit the debate to maximum of 4 minutes per member, something like that.
Okay. And then there's a question, we haven't actually gotten to the voting. The next question really is on after the vote. Does the chair say the motion is adopted or the motion carries?
Let's get to that in just a little bit, and I hope I get it right. All right. I think, well, all right, let's hold on that one. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much. All right. So once the debate has happened, at this point, nobody else is raising their hand. And so the chair looks around. Let's go ahead and they put the question. And what does that really mean? It means, are you ready to vote? And the chair will say something to the effect of, is there any further debate? Hearing none, I'm going to call the question. I'm going to call the question. And so, which means let's go ahead into the vote. Now let's talk about the different types of voting. I've already touched one, which is unanimous consent. Let's go into them. These are just some of the many options that we have for voting. Some of the more frequently used ones. The first one is voice. And this is where we actually say, all those in favor indicate by saying aye. All those opposed indicate by saying no. And the audience responds, and then the chair must decide, what was the general consensus? Is there a majority for or against that motion? I'll talk about the results in just a few minutes. Let me get through all the voting options. Okay, the second one is rising vote. This is where the voice vote was so close that the chair decides, you know what, let me have people rise and tell me what their preferences are so I can physically see their interest in for or against that particular motion. So all those in favor, please rise. Thank you. Sit down. All those opposed, please rise. Sit down. Okay. Next one. If we're in a small group, we can go ahead and raise our hands. All those in favor, raise your hand. Go ahead. All those against, please raise your hand. All right, and so we can try to get a feel in a small group what the general consensus is. Now, if we still aren't sure after the rising vote, the chair can come back and say, I'm going to do a counted rising vote. And this is where the chair may request some assistance with the count. especially if it's a larger group. If it's a small group, that person can usually count fairly quickly how many are for and how many are against, just to make sure that we know what the assembly is choosing. In the event that the assembly says, I don't agree with that decision, that count that was made by the chair, I actually believe that it was against the motion as opposed to for the motion, then we can actually step in and have another viewing. I'm going to call it a viewing, but another conversation, and request that there be a recount of it. Usually they use a different method for the recounting. All right, roll call and ballots are used. Ballots are typically outlined in the bylaws or the Constitution to suggest that this election or this process of disciplinary action must be done by ballot. And the roll call, we see that a lot in our different Congress affiliated organizations. And lastly, the unanimous consent I covered previously. If there's no objection, we will accept that motion. All right, so let's go into the conversation about the results. Okay, there's actually 3 different steps when a chairperson announces the results. The first of that is reporting on the voting itself. So if there was a lot of people for a motion, the chair will say the ayes have it. If there was actually a counted number, then the chair will pause and give the report of the count. There was 12 for and 8 against. The ayes have it. And that's important to get that across. Also, that vote should be entered into the minutes. The second step in the process of declaring or announcing the results is to declare that the motion is adopted. This is going back to that earlier question that we had. Is the motion adopted or lost? And it's just simply saying the motion is adopted or the motion is lost. And then lastly, we need to state the effect of the vote or order its execution if appropriate. So if it's, let's say, forming a committee, we're going to go ahead and request or demand or order that it is executed. So so-and-so will be in charge and so forth. That should have been part of that motion, who would be the committee chair. But what is the effect of that vote? So effective immediately or effective at our next meeting, we will meet at the Cat Cafe. Okay, and so just saying this is what we're going to do because it has passed its adoption. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pause here and see what questions we have.
So we have a question about when you announce the results on a virtual meeting or a webinar, when everyone can't see the votes, is there a different way that you announce it?
One of the ways that I have a preference for is to use some sort of polling feature that can actually show the results physically to the audience. I find that to be very helpful.
Okay. The next question is, when do you require a motion versus unanimous consent?
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about an unanimous consent. When, let's say the chair thinks this will not be debated by the audience is going to be for this motion, I'm going to go ahead and use unanimous consent for it. So is there any objection to accepting the minutes as presented? Would be an example of a motion using unanimous consent. He or she pauses, and at this point, if there's an audience member who objects, that's when they speak out to say, I object. And then the chair says, okay, what's that about? And the person in the audience will then respond why they are objecting. And so there can, at that point, if there is any objection, that we would then shift over to the more traditional formal way of voting, which is making the motion and having it seconded. And then usually by this point, it is seconded just by the nature of, let me step back on that one too. I've got some people in this audience that are clearly quite knowledgeable. And one of the things with the second is that we don't actually have to have a second if it indicates in the audience that there is a lot of interest. For example, if there had been an amendment to it. We already know that there's people in the audience interested in this motion. And also the second does not get listed on the minutes, and that's something I've seen a lot. People think the person who seconded it needs to be in the minutes. Okay, going back to unanimous consent, when a member objects, then we would go through the traditional process of making a decision and getting it ruled on by the assembly. Okay, I'm going to pause, Beth, because I just realized I only have a few more slides. And
We've had quite a few questions coming in over the last couple of minutes, so this is great.
Okay.
So another question about announcing the results of the vote.
Mm-hmm.
If the members voted yes or no, is it required that the chair declares, I believe the yeses have it, or I declare the motion adopted? So what's the correct form, and is there a standardized format?
If the chair is uncertain, they might want to phrase it in I believe. And at that point, somebody can say division or some sort of contest associated with the voting results. If they are fairly certain about it, they would say, I declare the motion is adopted or lost. That is Robert's rules, what they say in their section for this area.
Okay. And referring back to the dog part, I think this was the amendment to the main motion to have it at the Cat Cafe.
Yes.
Do you act on the amendment of the dog park before you go back to the main motion?
Yes, you do. You get through the process of the amendment. So if there's an amendment and somebody seconds that amendment, such as instead of Cat Cafe, delete it, insert dog park, then the assembly will then debate dog park as an amendment to that main motion. And if it fails, if it's voted on and fails, at that point, then it would go back to the main motion, what was originally stated, and then that is still under debate. It could be that another person adds another amendment at some point to say, instead of the Cat Cafe, I think we ought to meet at the animal shelter and have a meeting there. They have a meeting room. I think it would be appropriate for us. So there could be multiple amendments going on. And so it's really important for the chair to pay attention to what is actually on the table in terms of the conversation, so that we don't get messed up. And it's really important that the chair helps the audience remember this is only about the amendment, not about the actual changing the venue. This is about the amendment to go to the dog park as opposed to the Cat Cafe.
So if the dog park is adopted, are we done?
No. At that point, the dog park has been amended to the main motion, but we still have to vote on whether to change the venue. And I have seen some groups fly by that and not make a separate vote. But I think when that happens, I typically don't step in if it appears that the majority of the audience really does want to change the venue to go to the dog park instead. And as a parliamentarian, it's our job to try to not impede business, but to make sure that it's flowing smoothly. It might be a private conversation that we would have with the chair afterwards to help them learn and improve their skills.
Okay. And another question on unanimous consent. If the vote requires a 2/3, if the vote required is 2/3 in the affirmative, can you use unanimous consent instead?
Yes, you can.
Why?
Elizabeth, okay, I'm going to pause this. Let me stop share. All right, now I can't see you.
Do you want me to answer this?
Sure.
So unanimous consent means nobody in the room has disagreed with the action that's proposed.
Yes.
And that means all of the members have accepted the action. So all is more than 2/3.
Which means yes.
Therefore, unanimous consent can be used in place.
I was pausing because I wasn't sure where you were going with it, but I believe I did say that. Yes, you can use it, but I paused because I was like, oh my God, and maybe I got this wrong, but yeah, I'm still learning. Thank you. All right. Do we still have more questions? Because I'm almost right at the end of my presentation.
No, I think that's the last one that's in the chat.
Okay, let me go ahead and finish this up and then we can have more conversation. Okay, so let's see. The chair announces the results. And we went through these 3 steps. All right, so what happens after that? Once the chair says in part C here, state the effect of the vote. In other words, our next meeting will be held at the Cat Cafe, or they order its execution. Yes, the treasurer may spend $2,000 to buy blah, 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 or up to $2,000 to buy this needed technology. And so all of this is now put into action. All right, and so what do we have when we're left with all of that? We have a happy assembly. Well, some of them are smiling, but the assembly then is responsible for implementing this. But we can celebrate that we have made a decision, and now we can go forward with our organization's mission and what we hope to propose and accomplish as an organization. So, and lastly, what we're left with is a well-handled motion. And I've got my email address up here if you would like to reach out to me later. I'm happy to talk to you further. Okay, at this point, let's go ahead and open it up for conversation.
Okay, so you want me to remove the spotlight at this point so that you can see all the faces.
Well, yeah, that would be great.
Our members can use the raise hand function if they have a question. Fred Finley has used a physical raise hand and would like to ask a question.
Fred?
Hi, Carol. I was you froze a couple of times, and I got kicked out of the meeting. I had to come and get back in, so I missed some of your talk. But I had a couple of questions about seconding. If someone proposes a motion and no one seconds it, what happens?
Usually, oh, go ahead.
If there's dead silence and no one seconds it, what happens?
The chair would then say, for lack of a second, the motion falls. And at that point, they move on to the next item of business.
Okay.
All right. So it's really important, though, that the chair does look around and repeat the motion in the event that nobody has seconded it at this point, that the chair looks around and says, you know, Fred has made this motion and repeats the motion. Fred would like us to meet at the Cat Cafe for our next meeting. And is there a second? And so I'm looking around to see, is there a second? And if the audience seems to say, no, I'm not going to support this motion. And not that I'm not going to support this motion, is I don't think we need to talk about it. This is going to be a waste of our time. And at that point, then we don't have a second, the motion falls. And then I move, as a chairperson, I would move on to the next item for discussion.
Mm-hmm.
All right, now, if you still really, really want the Cat Cafe or your motion to be heard and implemented, you might want to think about how to reframe your motion so that other people in the audience would be interested in having this talked about.
Okay.
Carol, what happens if the motion is not seconded, but the chair recognizes a speaker in debate?
Just by the recognition of the speaker in debate, it is seconded. Even though it might not have been formally seconded, it is seconded. Now, it is always possible that once, let's say the chairperson has recognized somebody for debate and that person's talking about how awful it is and they don't like this motion at all, that somebody in the audience might come and say, point of order, nobody seconded this. And at that point, then the chair could, I think, go either way, which is to say, yes, we should be considering this, or no, because there's no second, we're not going to go down this path. All right. But it's really the responsibility to the chair. And I want to go back to an earlier comment that was made, that if this is a waste of our time, the chair has a responsibility to make sure that we don't spend time on it. And so it's very important for the chair to be reviewing and thinking about, is this a good thing for us to be talking about or not? Is it out of order, or is it within the mission of our organization to have this conversation? Thank you.
Okay, we have a question on nomenclature. Is the person presiding at the meeting known as the chairperson, the chairman, or the chair?
All three terms are accepted in today's world. Sometimes we also know them as president, and we accept that as long as the person in charge is really in charge, where most of us are good with it. With nomenclature, I tend to be a little bit more flexible perhaps than some of the people here, because I work with a lot of people who don't know what they're doing in terms of this, and I want to be flexible with them. So if they happen to call that person a president, I'm going to call them a president too. As long as they know that they are the chair of the meeting and they're behaving in that way, I'm okay with it.
Okay, we have a comment in the chat about seconding a motion, and I think we should ask Gretchen to unmute and explain the things that she wants to get across.
Thank you,
About
Gretchen.
seconders.
Thank you, Beth.
Well, I just was saying, sometimes if you have your idea, you sometimes arrange to have a person second it because, you've talked ahead of time and you say, would you second it? But I will say among parliamentarian circles, we are very often happy to, if we hear something, a lot of us will just shout out second, because we know we want to talk about it. Now, as a presiding officer, I must say that at times I have been glad that nobody seconded a motion. And that's probably not a good thing to say, but sometimes motions really, you don't want to talk about them. And you've made that clear, Carol, that if people just say, it doesn't have any, I don't want to talk about it, nobody seconds it, and then you just say on the next item of business is, and you go on. But anyway, sometimes I'm relieved when nobody seconds.
Oh, yeah. And sometimes I've also heard chairs say, during the break, I would like you to work with a couple people to help form that motion more effectively, and I'd be happy to consider it later today.
That's very helpful.
It is, because then that person really gets to work at developing their own ideas into a proper format that it would be considered positive by the assembly.
If I think it's a terrible idea, can I second the motion anyway?
Yes, and this goes to Gretchen's last point in her chat message, is that a second does not indicate support. And I did convey that earlier, is that let's say I think it ought to be considered by the assembly and then formally voted on, hopefully in against the motion, but at least we did formally consider it and get it into the minutes that we did so. By all means, let's get a second and let's vote on it and vote it down if we don't like it. So,
at what time in the meeting does the parliamentarian speak?
oh, this is a trick question, is it?
I think.
All right, I'm just teasing, but the parliamentarian does not speak in the meeting, and except for to talk privately to the president or the chairperson to say, oh, you might want to do it this way, or be careful about that, or oh, stop what you're doing. So the parliamentarian is not speaking to the assembly unless called on by the presiding officer. Instead, the parliamentarian should be speaking to the presiding officer. Thank you, Joyce. And Alicia, thank you for your
You're
cute
welcome.
laughter.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
It was not a trick question.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure because
No.
it does get into that
Yes.
area.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're
Any
welcome.
other comments or questions?
That
one.
last comment about the parliamentarian, I think that works best if you're in an in-person meeting, but when you're having Zoom, that can be a little bit difficult unless you have a specific way to contact your chair.
Yeah, I've actually seen in Zoom meetings or other types of online formats where people will spend a little bit of time with their phone communicating in private chat or using other things like Slack to communicate privately. Frame it this way, and this is how you say it to the presiding officer who might not be as comfortable with some of the phrasing as they might want to be. Thank you,
You
April.
can use the direct chat in the Zoom platform. And if it's something that's going to need more direct conversation, you can have it pre-set up that there's a breakout room for you to go into so that the parliamentarian, the presiding officer, can speak privately. And the meeting just is standing at ease during that time, in the same way that you would stand at ease in an in-person meeting if there was something where the presiding officer needed a bit of a longer chat with the parliamentarian.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I was also just thinking of, oh, my mind just slipped. There was another idea though, which it just slipped. So I'm going to skip over that. I saw Fred, you had another question.
Yes. In the beginning, you talked about brainstorming.
Yeah.
What if a group of members think that a particular issue that they think is going to be voted on deserves a separate meeting where we sit around and pool ideas about it? How would they go about, would someone make a motion that we not discuss this here? Let's do it at another meeting?
Absolutely, Fred. Great question. My suggestion, particularly with your idea, is to convert it to a different type of motion, which is I move that this go to committee, refer to committee. And then you might want to state who the chairperson is and maybe some of the members of that committee, and have it reviewed by the assembly to say, yes, we think it ought to go to committee to be considered and fully developed, and then come back with a recommendation.
Okay.
Okay. All right, good. A really wonderful conversation. I don't see any other hands up. Looking around. I just want to recognize some of you from the Toastmaster world that joined us today. I want to thank you for joining us. And I know we have a wide diversity of people here from New York. I also know Sri Lanka, somebody from Sri Lanka. I don't see them here, but they had said that they were coming. So it was just a huge turnout. And I want to thank you for that. I consider this my inaugural introduction to Michigan State Association of Parliamentarians. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. Thank you. Back to you, Beth.
I think it's back to our president, Gretchen Denton.
Gretchen, thank you.
I'll show my face again. Carol, we want to thank you so much for sharing your expertise this evening. I got so involved that I really wanted to participate in debate about having it at the Cat Cafe. But alas, we'll do practice debating another time. So thank you, Carol, because I think I appreciate it, especially you encouraging people to try to put your ideas into motions, even if you're a little hesitant about it. And as you said, Carol, a presiding officer can be such a help if they are either help you at that time or tell you to, during the break, why don't you work on that? So thank you for making it possible for all of us to have a hunch and present an idea. I want to say special thanks to Elizabeth, who has been our technical advisor and moderator tonight. And I want to say thank you to all of you for spending an hour with us. It's a warm evening here in Michigan, and this was a delightful way to spend it. And we appreciate that you were able to be part of this, and we look forward to seeing you in September when we do this. We do this every other month, and we have different topics, and we look forward to all of the responses that you are going to be giving on a survey question, because they help us plan our future lessons. And Carol, thank you for being our presenter tonight, and thank you for being part of the Michigan State Association of Parliamentarians. I think we're going to have a lot of fun together.
Well, thank you. Oh, I forgot to, I have two people in Australia that are here today as well. We did reach out. We have a wide network, and that's what happens. We get a small world, right? Parliamentarians. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Carol.
Can I just add that Gretchen has mentioned the survey that you'll get after you come off of this Zoom meeting. Also, we are taking the recording. Our policy is to forward the recording to those who request the recording. So I'm going to put back up on screen the email address at which to request the recording. michiganparliamentarians@gmail.com. Thank you all for coming out tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carol.
Mary